欢迎收听方伟时间哈，今天给大家带来的是一个关于中国的一个非常非常重要的话题，但是这个关于中国的深度的话题，而且是需要调查才能有发言权的话题，却是方伟要问的是一个西方人来给我们讲这个 story 哈，这个故事。好，那么这个西方人呢写了本书啊，这本书叫做 Kill to Order 哈，那么就是叫做什么来着？看着订单，看着菜单杀人。那么这本书呢，在2个月前上到亚马逊的这个网站上，那到现在呢是下来的话，现在是在这个叫做共产主义跟社会主义这个话题上是第一畅销书，然后在亚洲政治这个领域呢也是第一畅销书，在全部的所有的政治领域的话是第10畅销书啊，所以已经进入到亚马逊的排行前10名。那与此同时呢，他这个得到了82个美国的名流的叫做认同，给他写前言啊，写赞助这里头包括 Discovery 的这个叫做主持人包括美国的大学校长，包括艾美奖的美国的电影演员啊，美国的喜剧演员，包括这个叫做富爸爸穷爸爸的这个作家啊，然后呢包括这很多了哈，82人，光是我从来没有在一本书上前面见到有这么多人啊，这在前言为他这个背书哈，为这本书背书。好，那这个话题呢讲的是什么呢？讲的就是中国的器官问题，活摘器官问题。我们都知道，习近平在北京的大阅兵的时候呢，跟普京有讲到啊，所谓的什么活到150岁，现在的科技已经到了这一步。所以呢，这背后的秘密到底是什么？那今天呢，这个非常非常中国的话题哈，我们现在请一位洋人来给我们讲清楚。这位洋人呢，就是我们现在的这个嘉宾哈，他的名字叫做 Jan 叶科里克哈。Jan, welcome to our program.
So good to be here, Alan.
Okay, so I just told my audience, I said this is a very Chinese topic, okay? And it does take investigative reporting. And how do you, as Westerners, become interested in this topic? 就我要问我们的观众，就是这是一个非常中国化的话题，而且需要调查研究的。作为一个西方人啊，他怎么能做这个事情？顺带给大家说一下 ，Yang 呢是这个 Epoch Times 就是大纪元时报在华府的记者站的主任，同时也是一位资深的记者哈。Yeah, let us know as a Westerner, how do you got involved into such a, Chinese topic?
That's a big question. I don't know where you want me to start, but part of the reason. Why don't I start at the beginning? Okay. Part of the reason is that back, in my previous life, I've had kind of different things I've done in my life, and one of the things was I was studying to be an evolutionary biologist. I actually spent 10 years in university doing that, and I studied actually in Madagascar. My fieldwork was done in Madagascar for my doctoral thesis. And on one of the trips that I came back from Madagascar, I started getting sick. I ended up, turned out that I had a parasitic worm infection, and actually many things happened. And I ended up with a disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's a rare neurological disorder. Basically, your immune system goes crazy and attacks your nervous system in your body. Okay, and you lose control of your body. And I was working at a lab at the University of Alberta in Canada, where I was in school, and basically I couldn't do my work anymore. So it sort of ended that part of my life, right? But and I was started to look for. There's no treatment for Guillain-Barré. Sometimes you get better, sometimes you get worse. Many people lose their life from this disease. And I met a guy at a coffee shop who had told me that he had a similar disease called chronic fatigue syndrome, and that he had used this Chinese meditation to help himself with it. And that meditation was the Falun Gong meditation. And so I kind of was open-minded. I knew that there was some alternative health methods that were possible, but I didn't really believe in them. But in this case, I thought, of course, I'll try anything. I had tried other things too. And, it made me, I started doing these slow motion exercises, and it made me feel a little better. And, to make a long story short, in about 2 months' time, when I went to see my neurologist again, she told me that I was in full remission and that basically I didn't have this disease anymore, or this syndrome anymore, this set of symptoms. And I mean, for me, it was, the reason I kept doing it was because it made me feel better. And I didn't fully realize that, it basically had taken me back all the way. I knew I felt a lot better. I got my reflexes back. That's one of the sort of telltale signs. They disappear. But, my whole range of motion came back, everything. And so this was incredible. But, in the process of this, I thought to myself, I don't know if you've ever encountered, faced with, whether you're going to live or die or something like this, Alan, but many people I've learned when I was kind of an agnostic, but I said in the off chance that there was someone up there, I was thought, God, if you're up there, I promised I would dedicate my life to service. Okay, this is important. And then when all this happened, right, I thought to myself, my goodness, I've been given a new lease on life, and I have to live this service now that I promised. And there was a woman at the University of Alberta whose mother had just escaped from China. She had been she had been tortured for refusing to give up her belief in Falun Gong. And I was just starting to learn about this, but this was an unbelievable thing to me, right? That someone, why? Like, I thought to myself, why are these people persecuted? Like, what did you do, right, to be persecuted, right? And the woman explained to me through her daughter, through translating, right, that they'd given her a piece of paper, and if you sign these 3 statements, you can go home. But if you don't sign these 3 statements, they were like, you have to renounce Falun Gong, you had to help re-educate other people. I can't remember what the third thing was, but basically the whole thing, and I'll never forget this. This was a seminal moment in my life because I get shivers up my spine right now remembering this moment because my parents, escaped from Poland under communism in 1970, and they taught me for years about why they had to escape. Why they had to leave, But I didn't fully understand it. I grew up in a free society. I didn't get it, But this moment, this woman, older woman, who had done nothing wrong, I realized this woman was being persecuted not because she had done anything wrong, but because it was communism, Like it was this system that my parents had tried to teach me about, but kind of failed. Because I was living in a completely free society and I couldn't understand it, right? And I knew at that moment that helping these people was going to be part of that service that I promised, right? I also did community development, education. I did many things as part of this service. But in 2006 was really when this, the first really kind of deeper evidence of this forced organ harvesting came out. When I first heard about it, I thought it was some crazy idea, conspiracy theory, whatever, right? Like it just sounds so crazy, right? That this issue could be real. But I saw the first real evidence, the whistleblowers, there were actually 2 almost at the same time that came out. And there was a whole report that these 2 my fellow Canadians, David Kilgore and David Matus, they put together a report that showed 17 lines of evidence, and which convinced me that this was real, even though I didn't want to believe it. Like I had revulsion to the whole concept, right, as most normal people would. So that's a bit of a long answer, but part of it is because I feel it's my vocation. And when I saw this organ harvesting, I also knew that this is something, I've always been interested in, strangely, right? I've always been interested in crimes against humanity. My wife's father was a Holocaust survivor. He passed recently. But, these issues, stopping crimes against humanity, why do they happen? Right? All these questions, this is something I've thought about a lot, right, in my life. And so this issue, when it came up, I mean, it's just an issue I had to cover. So that's why I've been covering it for the better part of 20 years on and off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I need to say thank you as a Chinese. I want to thank you for your interest and for your pursuit in this line of work, which is very important. 但是呢，我觉得这个话题是一个非常怎么说呢，非常艰难的话题。那么很多中国人都不相信这件事情哈。那Jan他怎么知道他所发现的是真的呢？So Jan, this is a very difficult topic. A lot of Chinese, even today, they still don't believe it, or it's hard to believe it. How do you know what you find out is true?
Well, first, let's define it, okay? Because there are many black market organ industries around the world. There's some in Mexico, there's some in Latin America, there's some in India, right? And there's these urban legends about people waking up on ice and having an organ cut out from them. But what's happening in China is a whole different level, okay? Basically, you have to have a state actor involved, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, and because you have to be able to you have to be able to dehumanize a group of people, and the Chinese Communist Party has been expert at this for throughout its whole history. There's always some group that's made the enemy and dehumanized and make dark and kind of dangerous and evil in the eyes of the rest of the population, right? So they're experts at that. And then you also have to be able to incarcerate a very large group of people. I'll explain why this is relevant in a moment, right? The combination of that, this is exactly what happened to the Falun Gong in 1999, right? Basically, there were 70 to 100 million people that were practicing it. It was bigger than the Chinese Communist Party itself. And they had to convince society that these people that were practicing truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance were somehow bad citizens, right, or evil or whatever. And so they pushed mass propaganda into the system, much like what the Germans did in the 30s, right? It's actually very similar talking points. Why is that important? Well, because most people are not ready to do horrible things to their fellow man. Most people are not psychopaths, right? So that sort of this hate propaganda, it creates a trick in our mind, right? And whenever there's any atrocity, remember I've been studying atrocity for a long time, right, in my life. Whenever there's any atrocity, these extreme human rights violations like forced organ harvesting or the Holocaust or genocides that have happened like in Rwanda, there's always this pre-element of demonization, dehumanization of the group, because that lets normal people, through this trick in our psychology, basically do terrible things to people that we normally would never do to our neighbor, because it's just totally inhuman, right? So this part is important. And the other part, right, this is one of the whistleblowers back in 2006 was an Israeli surgeon, okay? His name is Jacob Levy. He had a patient. He was a head of the Israeli Transplant Association, professor of transplant surgery. He had a patient that needed a heart really badly. He was going to die. And the guy one day told him, and he's told me this story personally, right? I'm tired of waiting. I have it arranged in China. I'm getting it in 2 weeks. Scheduled, right? And Jacob understood at that moment that that's impossible, right? Because in any ethical system, if you know, first of all, scheduled means you know when someone's going to be dead. How could you know, right? Well, you only because you're making them dead. But the other part was that you could do the match in 2 weeks. Well, there's only one way that can happen. It's because you have a large population of people ready to be used, blood type, tissue type, and this is what the Chinese Communist Party started doing with the Falun Gong, right? Blood type, tissue type, organ scanned, and the moment that money is paid for that transplant from overseas or from inside China, that person is already pre-matched. In a civilized society, there has to be a catastrophic accident, and all these different variables have to match: the size, the blood type, the tissue, all of that. But here the person is pre-matched and ready to be killed to order. That's why that's the name of my book, the title, Killed to Order. Okay, because basically, and this has been happening at scale from the year 2000, they basically grow that industry massively. They geometrically grow that industry. By 2005, you're having tens of thousands of transplants being done on the backs of this mass incarcerated group of perhaps 1 million or 2 million Falun Gong in the system. And then because nobody did anything about it until 2014 or 2015, okay, what they thought, hey, look, that no one really cares. They pretended that they created an organ registry in 2015. It turned out that the data was false. It's a perfect quadratic equation. This is what researchers showed, right? But what they did was, because no one cared, they found another group of people, the Uyghur people in the northwest of China in Xinjiang province, isolated, under military control. They incarcerated 1 million of them. They dehumanized 1 million of them, plus more than 1 million. And then they started using them in this horrible machine, okay? So, I mean, first of all, I want to define the problem, right? This is something that David Matas, one of the original researchers on this, calls an evil yet to be seen on this planet. Okay, an evil yet to be seen on. And this is someone who played a big role in prosecuting the last Nazi war criminal found in Canada. Okay, very serious. He was a kind of a Nazi hunter for a number of years. Okay, so what is the evidence? Okay, there was a tribunal held between late 2018 and early 2020, chaired by Sir Jeffrey Nice, who prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic, I might add, International People's Tribunal that looked at the volumes of evidence that exist. Okay, but I'm just going to give you a few examples of things that have even come out since then. That's chinatribunal.com. I recommend people to go there. That evidence is all in Chinese as well, right? Not just in English, available. Volumes of it. It's worth reading if you're interested in this topic in whatever language. There's multiple languages there, I noticed. But in maybe 3 years ago, in the American Journal of Transplantation, there's a paper that's titled Execution by Organ Procurement. Okay? This paper, it looked at between 2,000 and 3,000 Chinese academic papers published in peer-reviewed, publicly available papers, and they asked the simple question, was the dead donor rule violated? Okay? And the dead donor rule just means you can't, so what it really means is someone has to be brain dead, body alive, right? Someone has to be truly dead before their organs are taken. And in a civilized society, what that means is you have an ethics team that assessed that this person, because of their catastrophic injuries in other places, but the organ, they're not coming back, so it's safe to transplant from such a person. Okay, but in these cases, 70 papers these researchers found in this execution by organ procurement paper, 71, I think it was, instances where the way the person died was actually having their organs removed from their body. In other words, they were murdered by having their organs removed. Okay.
So you're saying, let me cut in. So basically, it's documented in those published paper. You can find that out.
So it's so normal in the Chinese transplant system. It is how the Chinese transplant system works, that these researchers have been doing it for so long, they didn't even realize that it was a problem to put murder into their research methods, okay, published research methods. That's the only explanation I can come up with why so many papers have murder listed in there. I mean, I will call it murder. Let's just call it death by what it's called, right? In the paper itself, execution by organ procurement, right? The person was killed by those organs being procured from that person. I mean, there's many other, obviously, pieces of evidence, but I think this one is very important and very strong because it shows many dimensions of the problem. And we're talking 60 to 90,000 transplants a year. So this is a very large-scale enterprise. I believe it was David Matas estimated it's about a $9 billion annual industry. Okay, so it's very profitable. But the other part, which I found shocking, I remember, like, probably all of your viewers are familiar with the hot mic moment with Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un walking in Tiananmen Square, observing the military parade, right? So I've been studying this issue for 20 years, and it had what they talked about had never occurred to me, okay? Basically, I'll paraphrase the conversation, but Xi says to Putin, when we're 70, we're just babies. Right? Putin responds and he says, through continual organ transplantation, maybe we can achieve immortality, right? And then Xi responds saying, our target is 150 years. Now, this is a paraphrase, right? But at that moment, again, a lightning bolt shot through me because I hadn't thought of it. 150 years is the target of the CCP's Elite Longevity Project, Project 981. Okay. And indeed, the Chinese super elites live a lot longer than the average person. How do they do that? Well, you imagine it's diet, it's maybe some blood transfusions, who knows what crazy, in a place where, regulations mean nothing for a super elite, what they would do to achieve that. What hadn't occurred to me that this horrible murder for organs industry that they've created is actually part of that Elite Longevity Project. Someone had even sent me a few years back an anecdote, right? This was an anecdote. There was this eulogy for a Chinese super elite that said, I kid you not, this sounds incredibly creepy, but this was, this was real, right? This person had multiple organs transplanted, and how great it is that that person was able to have these multiple organs, transplanted. And I at the time, I just thought this is some really weird, extreme stuff, right? But then I suddenly understood, right? We're talking about what $9 billion, right, a year is big, right? But imagine if you're a Chinese super elite, and that means that you have unlimited on-demand organs available to you forever. What is that worth to someone who has no moral boundary, right? This is a very serious issue.
Wow. 很难相信哈。那我想说，他把这些真相揭示出来之后啊，他有多容易或多难去说服他的读者或者其他的西方人。So Jan, how hard or how easy is it for you to persuade or convince the Westerners that what do you find out is true?
That's a great question. When we first started, which was when I realized it was real, okay, I remember I was traveling in Poland at the time. I'm a Polish native speaker. And I got a call basically that 10,000 people in Israel had signed a petition that said, expose this issue at Auschwitz. And I happened to be in the area. So, as just a kind of a fun, strange fact, my family name is even in Poland, is very rare. Americans can't pronounce it. Probably most Chinese can't pronounce it. But in this region where the Germans built Auschwitz, where built that concentration camp, that name is well known because it's from that region. So when I went in to the Auschwitz Museum, the education director, and I said, hey, I got this petition, these people, they want to expose this issue at Auschwitz. And the guy looks at me, he's like, Jan Jekielek, ale swojskie nazwisko pan ma. And what that means is, I'll translate from Polish, it means, what a deeply familiar local last name you have, okay? So immediately we had this bond because of this quirk of fate or God's will or, whatever, and so we were able to actually organize this press conference at the Auschwitz Center of Dialogue and Prayer. And so that was kind of one of the original big press events. People came from America. Children of Holocaust survivors came from Israel. I think it was one of these moments. But at that time, okay, when I would talk to people about this issue, more often than not, in the middle of the conversation, people would leave mentally. That's why I was smiling when you asked me this question, because I remember what it was like. I mean, I understand why people didn't want to know. They absolutely didn't want to hear about it because it's such an extreme violation, right? And all of us, people listening to this today, you might think, this is crazy. What are you even talking about? Why are you doing this? Well, I'm doing it because it's horribly real. And, unfortunately, when it comes to mass atrocities of this nature, it's very natural for us to not want to believe. Now, since COVID, this is something that I've observed. Since COVID, things have changed a bit. And I see more people are ready to believe it. And I think that the reason is partially because we all saw these videos, right, of Chinese being welded into their homes under CCP COVID policy. I mean, first of all, lockdown policies absolutely makes no sense. For some reason, we in the West decided to copy this insane policy from China, which could never contain a virus. I mean, it's a weird totalitarian mindset. Bad idea, terrible idea. But how the Chinese people suffered, right? By literally being welded in their homes, right? Unable to leave under social credit penalty, and the world seeing that, right? I think that is what changed it. I think that people now understand that what a totalitarian mindset can engender, can create, right? I don't know for sure. I can just tell you that most people I talk to right now just look sad and say, that's horrible, Jan, instead of escaping in their minds, which is what they did in the past, okay, more often. So, and I think that's probably the reason, because people are more clear frankly how evil this regime is and this Communist Party really is. But it's still a very difficult topic to cover, to be perfectly honest, because it really sounds unbelievable, right? On the surface.
So do you see that the reception by the people is increasing, or how do you see that?
I mean, dramatically. I mean, I can tell you, like right now, actually, if you have any viewers who are here in the Washington D.C. area where I'm recording from, the Kennedy Center, Trump Kennedy Center, is having an event on March 16th. They're actually organizing it. The Trump Kennedy Center itself, as part of its Millennium Stage series, is organizing an event which is myself speaking with Rob Schneider, the comedian, well-known comedian. Rob has basically gotten deeply interested in this issue and wanted to expose it. And so, we're going to be in conversation on stage. We're still figuring out how to inject the dark humor into it because, of course, it's a very difficult topic to kind of laugh about. But there's certain aspects that can be laughed about, like the longevity part and so forth. But it's good. I know from his commitment and his intensity and frankly his genius, right, as a comedian. We're going to have a very powerful event, and it's going to be held on a huge stage. So there's a lot of space. The whole idea, and it was that basically anybody who would want to really learn about this in a deep way, in a unusual way, could do it in one of the prestige venues in the country, in America, right? And so I'm greatly honored. I mean, this was my publisher's idea to try to do this. I thought it sounded a little bit crazy at first, but again, I think that the world is ready to hear this, to understand that it's real, and actually to help at least put a dent in it, at least stop America's complicity in it, which is something I've written quite a bit about. And if not, really, kind of put a dent in it and slow it down.
Mm-hmm. So for the Kennedy Center event, what time is that? It's a Monday, right? I checked it's Monday. What time is it? What's the day?
Monday, March 16th at 6 p.m. Okay. And go to killedtoorderevent.com, killedtoorderevent.com. And that's where you will basically get the RSVP link from Kennedy Center itself. And by the way, killedtoorder.com, that's the book. If you want to buy the book, it's available to be bought for pre-order. Then you'll get it on March 17th right now. Or if you come to Kennedy Center on March 16th, one day before, the first 1,000 people are getting a book. Basically, someone who also is very committed to this issue has bought 1,000 books to give to people. I'm not going to name the donor because I have to get permission first. But it was, again, my heart is, super warmed by this, that someone is that committed, right, that they bought 1,000 books to give to the first 1,000 people that come in the room for that event.
Wow. Okay, let me say that in Chinese. 所以呢，在3月16号晚上的6点钟，在国家剧院这个肯尼迪中心，现在叫做川普肯尼迪中心，那么将举办一个关于这本书的一个研讨会那在台上呢是 Rob Schneider 和Jan 他们2个人一起作为这个叫做共同的发言人，好吧？那这个。如果那天去的话呢，你可以得到一本免费的书所以呢，在叫做 KillToOrderEvent.com 这个网站上呢，你可以先去就说锁定你的位置。如果你在 DC 的话，弗吉尼亚或者马里兰呢，或者说美国东部的话，我就推荐你去那天我很有可能也会去。所以呢，这真的是非常好的一个 event 在那个地方你可以见到 Jan himself 然后呢，我觉得是一个非常好的一个机会，这是一个很高档次的美国主流社会关于这个话题的一个探讨。我觉得如果对我们的这个时代这个话题真的，我觉得我们怀有一份责任的话呢，我觉得参加这个活动呢是很有价值的。I still have a couple of quick questions for you. And so in the past, 10 years, you started working on this in 2006. You are a Washington bureau chief of the Epoch Times. So you deal with the politicians. How does U.S. government receiving this, including our Congress people and our administration? What's their response?
Well, it's a very exciting time to deal with this issue, okay? And I'll explain why. Because at many levels of government, it's being addressed, okay? So I'll just add, at the grassroots level, not even government, right? The Rotary Club, and some of you will be familiar with Rotary Club. I used to do international youth exchange programs. I always went to local communities to work with the Rotary Club because there was always great people there, right? Great local community leaders. Well, they have a satellite club that they've created specifically to try to counter this forced organ harvesting in China issue. Okay, the End Forced Organ Harvesting Satellite Club, that in Rotary, and they're putting on screenings of films. They're getting books. You know, Kill to Order, the book. By the way, this is the book if you're going to get if you come a day early to Kennedy Center, and of course if you order it. But so that's happening at the grassroots level. And so my point is, for someone that isn't like ready to get involved in some way, you know, but they actually want to help in some way, they can actually contact their local Rotary Club and they'll get connected to this group. So there's a way you can get engaged. You can also call your senators. Okay, now let me explain why calling your senators is a good idea. Because there are actually two pieces of legislation. Okay, one is called the Falun Gong Protection Act. Another one is called the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act. Both of those pieces of federal legislation have passed the House near unanimously. Only one dissenting voice across all of them. I mean, of course, this is the most nonpartisan issue you can imagine, right? Like stopping, you know, a crime against humanity. I think everyone can get behind that, whatever your political orientation. But this is really, you know, a very significant time. There's these two key, very good pieces of legislation. The Falun Gong Protection Act, it actually says the U.S. policy is to not participate in any way in this Chinese forced organ harvesting. I'm paraphrasing legislation here a bit, but also to sanction people for life that are involved in this in some way. And, you know, a lot of Chinese super elites, they have exit strategies to places, for example, America, right? And so the effect of this will be that some people will think to themselves, you know what, maybe I don't want to be involved in this anymore because I don't want to endanger my possible exit strategy to America when things go bad here in China and I want to, you know, I've got my money overseas. My point is that this legislation and this Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act also is kind of a bit broader than just focused on China, you know, but they have teeth. Like this will actually have an impact, right, on slowing things. Now, so that's at the federal level. At the state level, 6 states, as we count, have passed legislation to prevent insurance, Medicaid, Medicare for paying for China transplants. Okay, it's a bit other things there, but roughly that's the 6 states. So there's 44 states to go, right? But so for people wanting to get involved in something, there you go. But 6 states have passed it. So that's at the state level, right? And at the administration level, it's very, very promising because there was an op-ed written in the Baltimore Sun by actually one of the owners of the Baltimore Sun, Armstrong Williams, some months ago, where he explains this whole issue. Like he realizes that it's real. He exposed it and started to talk a little bit about, you know, the connection to America. And HHS, this Twitter, the official main Twitter for HHS, or X account, pardon me, not Twitter anymore, responded, you know, this is something that should end. So that signaled, you know, the first time an agency and an administration in the U.S. government had said, you know, of course, we've had groups like USCIRF, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, but that's a bit aside from government. We've had, you know, we've had CECC and Congress, you know, document some of these things. There are other groups, but in terms of a federal agency actually saying this should stop, this is the first time. So that's very promising. And Bobby Kennedy, right, HHS under Bobby Kennedy Jr. has actually, the secretary of HHS, has decertified 2 organ transplant systems in America, right, in 2025, okay, last year. And so, and then I actually responded to this original op-ed with my own, basically saying, look, we have a problem in America. And the problem was, you know, the promise years ago was that America was going to change China for the better. We were going to help them liberalize like South Korea or Taiwan if we just put enough money in. But the CCP kind of faked America out, right? And basically took the money and built even more repressive totalitarian dictatorship in a lot of ways, maybe with less killing, but the ability to have a stranglehold on a population. I mean, I think it's unprecedented in history that the CCP has built on, frankly, on American ingenuity, American technology, American money. I mean, there's even a case in the Supreme Court right now, right, where the allegation, Cisco v. Doe, where the allegation is that Cisco Systems actually built the proto technology that became, the Golden Shield project and which is the bigger censorship, surveillance, and capture project against dissidents, and part of this social credit system in China. So anyway, my point is that China benefited under the CCP massively from this kind of U.S. influx of cash and information. And even now, right, it's actually, we train some of those surgeons. That's documented, right? We train some of the surgeons. We have research partnerships. The Select Committee on the CCP, right, in the U.S. Congress actually wrote a letter to Harvard about some research partnerships that have organ transplant issues, specifically citing forced organ harvesting in the last year. There's all these places where we're kind of complicit. So this is something that we can actually stop, right? Like this is something, NIH can just say, we're not going to fund anything related to forced organ harvesting. I was talking about this. Actually, I recently interviewed the NIH director, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and he was telling me about some reforms, right, to the system that he's introducing so that grants are more transparent and more accountable to NIH itself. And that system, we actually had this discussion. You could even clip it out if you want, right? But this discussion, there's a way for NIH to make sure, if it chooses to never fund anything related to transplantation in China. And of course, I just think we shouldn't be doing anything with the transplant system until an independent body can demonstrate, the CCP can demonstrate to an independent body that it has changed. And that's the only way this is going to work, because they've never provided, this is the crazy part, we're talking about evidence. They've never provided any evidence to show they have a different transplant system, right? Because the way that you would answer this allegation, right? Hey, Jan is coming out saying, look, you guys have this killed to order transplant system. It's a crime against humanity. The way you counter that, right, if you care about what Jan thinks, I hope a lot of people do, but is to show, look, no, actually, our transplant system's normal. Here's how it works, and here's the data, right? Yeah. It would be very simple. Any country could do this. Any country would do this. They don't do that. All they do is they attack the messenger. Right? They slander the messenger. They have no response. Why? Well, because their whole system works that way. There might be a few, what we would call legitimate transplants, but they're just would be a drop in the bucket in this massive, monstrous system. So I hope I answered your question.
I want people to get your book. Okay, so tell me about the book. If people read the book, what are they going to find out? What's their takeaway?
Well, the book is the book is in two parts, okay? The first part is, China's, I'll read the subtitle, okay? China's organ harvesting industry. It explains how it works, and it details all the evidence extensively. So, you might still doubt the evidence. I haven't been able to tell you that much. We only have so much time, but it's in quite a lot of detail in here. That's the first third to a half of the book. The other half is the true nature of America's biggest adversary. Okay, most people agree now that the CCP is America's biggest adversary. But the problem that we've had is that we don't understand its nature. Okay, we don't understand its nature. So this book is written actually in a very readable way. I think that's why it's like #1 in communism and socialism right now on Amazon, and #1 in Asian politics, even though it's still 15 days out from publication, right? Is because it explains these things in a way that anybody can understand. It's not written for academics. It's written for someone who has time to read a book at home and understand some difficult questions. Our biggest problem all these years, the reason the CCP has been able to extract so much blood and treasure, so to speak, from the U.S. When I say blood, I'm talking about like the fentanyl, warfare that they've been waging against America. But is because we still don't fully understand who we're dealing with. And this organ industry actually is the perfect lens to understand that. And I spent about 2/3 of the book explaining this in some detail, basically. And in a way, so this is also like there might be people that are watching who already understand the true nature of America's biggest adversary, which thank you for that. God bless you. and please help others understand, because there's way too few of you out there, okay? But this is a book that you could give to people, right, to help them understand. If they don't understand, or maybe they're just starting to understand. You want to know what's the reality. Well, this is something that's written just in a very readable, open way. And a few people have told me that it actually, even though it does deal with some very dark, big issues, right, it's also somehow, because it's part of my personal stories in here as well, and I just tell it from the way I experienced it, right, and why I decided to get on. You asked me some of these questions. I told part of that story, but there's a lot more to that story, and especially the understanding of, it took me years to fully grasp what the CCP was and how it works, because it's not obvious, because normal people, frankly, it's very difficult for normal people to understand. It's a very different system. As you know, Alan, I know, because we know each other, through, we share this common understanding of the CCP threat, which by the way, I just wanted to say, I'm incredibly grateful to you for your work in helping, expose some of these darkest realities of communist China to fellow Chinese, but also to Americans. I've learned a ton from you, so I'm honored to be on this show.
Yeah, thank you. And let me say things in Chinese to wrap it up. 就是说 Jan 呢，他写这本书啊，大家知道他是个西方人哈，大家听了刚才他说的故事，这本书有2个部分，一个部分呢是关于这个叫做 organ harvesting 啊，就是活摘器官这件事情的证据到底在什么地方。第二部分就是说如何去真正看待这个中共的本质。这是个西方人的观点，我非常建议我们所有的观众朋友哈，能够把这本书买来送给你的同事哈，送给你的孩子。我觉得这是最有意义的事情，因为 Jan 是我的好朋友哈，我其实对他非常的了解，非常诚实，非常正直，非常勤奋的一个西方的一个 journalist 哈，一个记者他做的工作我是完全支持，我这英文叫做什么 fully endorse 哈，所以呢，我希望大家每个人能买5本书5本书送给你的朋友，送给你的西方朋友哈，或者送给你的孩子，我觉得这是我们能为中国做的最好的事情。虽然远在这个海外吧，如果是海外的话我们呢能这件事情就是把我们这个时代的真相揭示出来，这是我们每个人都成为这个就推动改变这件事情的洪流中的那个水滴。Jan, what I recommend my audience is each person buy 5 books. Okay, because my audience, most of them, they are Chinese American who came here 20, 30 years ago. They speak Chinese, they're first generation, but their kids speak English. Okay, I want them to each buy 5 books and give to their coworkers, to their children. And I think this is the best thing they can do for China. Besides, what do you have done for China? As a Westerner, you put so much time into it. Have my great admiration, and I think now it's time for us to do our part.
Well, I love this, so if you are going to, please follow Alan's advice. I love this advice, by the way. But see if you can get those books before the 17th, or actually, I think it's before the 21st is that first week of sales. If we can actually make this into being a bestseller, I think millions of people will learn this issue that just didn't really know it or didn't want to know it, because it gives it that kind of a bit more of this kind of prestige or something like that. That's my goal. Epoch Times has actually been selling my book, and I'm giving all my kind of royalties, anything like that comes out of it through Epoch Times to Epoch Times. It's not, this is not a project to make money for myself. I just want to be clear on that, because I truly believe that getting this book and sharing it will help people understand, and actually, basically us being able to deal with communist China with open eyes, really for the first time. We've made huge progress in the last 10 years to get there, but I still think that last part, some of us believe that this is like some sort of normal regime that you can negotiate with in normal ways. No, actually, the other day I was looking, I have a friend, Christopher Balding, who's an economist, a very, very good China analyst. I trust his sort of vision on China's economy, one of the top people I trust on this. But he had a kind of a funny thing where he said, people ask me what book to read about communist China. He said, well, I actually just say, look at the mafia movies. Okay. And so, of course, I told him later, I said, well, I've got a book for you, right? But why did he say the mafia movie? He said, well, because they really just only understand raw power, right? And so, you need, the way you communicate is through a horse's head in a bed. That is an effective communication method, right? I kind of laughed, but it actually is kind of true. That's not the whole story. I actually lay out a lot of these pieces in Kill to Order, right? How the way of thinking, the approach, and again, in ways that many people can understand. But that's just one example, right? Like if you can't, negotiating is very hard, but if you have a lot of leverage, right, that changes the equation. It's the only way you can do it.
Okay, I have an idea. Let me say that in Chinese first. 如果你买5本书的话，哈，你把它这个拍上照，哈，放在桌上拍上照。送给你的朋友和你的这个叫同事吧，或者你的孩子哈。那方伟呢，我送你上下册2本书，就是叫做《裸体共产党人》哈。这是中文的啊，这是我把这个保罗斯考森教授的书翻译过来，并且把它叫做做了一个更新。所以呢2件事情啊，第一呢，我觉得买5本这个叫做这本书哈，叫做《Kill to Order》这本书，同时呢，这个要在3月20号之前买，3月20号之前买哈。另外呢，在3月16号星期一，在这个叫做肯尼迪中心哈，那么这么个活动，那就是希望您能够去参加。如果你在附近的话，我觉得也是对这件事情的支持。这就是我们在自由的美国，我们做一点简单的事情可以造成巨大的一个改变。那么如果你能买这5本书的话呢，如果在3月20号之前买啊，那将把这个书再往上推高它的名次，就会让成千上万的美国人买。所以这就是我们能做的事情，好吧？那方伟给出我的贡献。So Jan, this is what I suggest to my audience. Each of them buy 5 books, and then they take a photo. Okay, and send it to me, and then I will give them a gift. Okay, 2 books called Naked Communist in Chinese. I just got that published, and in Chinese, joining hand with Paul Skousen, Professor Paul Skousen. I will give those 2 books to them as a gift. And the condition is they need to buy 5 books of your books by March 20th.
By the way, an incredibly important book, not just in Chinese, but in English. So another book I would recommend. But first buy Kill to Order, then get the Naked Communist.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 things. Okay, one is March 16th, right, in the Trump Kennedy Center, 6 o'clock in the evening. And the second is buy these 5 books, okay, send the photo to me, and I will send out my gift. All right, okay, thank you very much for coming to my show. And best wish, and may the all American people, got to read this book and understand what is truly happening in China.
Alan, thank you so much.
好的，那我就来收尾一下哈，谢谢Jan来到我的节目。我想跟大家说的就是刚才这个采访我觉得非常重要，我也希望大家能够分享这个采访。那么2件事情啊，一个就是3月16号，如果在 DC 马里兰和这个弗吉尼亚一带的朋友哈，那我非常建议您参加在这个叫做川普肯尼迪中心国家剧院哈做的这个研讨会。那么然后这个研讨会呢是不用费用的，但是你必须先注册，这是一个非常高档次的研讨会，不妨去看一下好不好？那很可能我也会去哈，这第一件事情。第2件事情，我建议我们每个人买5本书，好吗？我也会买5本书，然后呢，我会送给你上下2册的《裸体共产党人》。好的，那就我们一起哈，大家就叫做什么来着？叫做积沙成塔哈，积业成裘，每个人做一个小小水珠的一个作用，然后呢，我们一起汇成一股洪流，一股真相的洪流啊，冲开前面的障碍，让这个叫做光明哈，重新照进中国。也照进这个西方社会，好吗 ？OK， 好，谢谢大家的收看啊！那喜欢方伟节目的，不要忘了点赞、订阅、打开小铃铛，好吗？好，那下次节目再见，拜拜。